Hey, how's it going? This is Stan, and we're going on another philosophy drive, and today we're going to be talking about responsibility. So, if I ask you, or if I ask someone, what is responsibility anyway? What is that thing? That person might say, well, responsibility is kind of a recognition given for a person's willful, causal role in bringing something about that we care about in some way. And I would respond and I would say, you know what? That's not a bad definition of responsibility. That's pretty good. That's kind of what we think about when we think about responsibility. The trick is there's kind of an ambiguous word in there that I don't really know what it means. You ask, well, what is that word, Stan? And I'll say it's the word willful. What does willful mean? And you might say to me, well, Stan, pretty obvious what willful means. We all kind of know what willful means. But then I say, really? Really, do you? Because I don't. And here's why. It gets a little bit complicated. And I have a thought experiment called the Misanthropalia thought experiment. Okay, so here's how it goes. Imagine that I, Stan, go off and murder someone. All right? And the people are searching around for the killer. They're looking for the person who is responsible. Who is responsible for this death? And they look around. They follow the train of clues. They eventually find me. I have blood on my hands, murder weapon next to me. I'm babbling about how I murdered this guy. I'm the one responsible. I'm the one who murdered that guy. Okay, so they clap me in irons. They throw me in jail. And then they do what is an expensive brain scan. In this imaginary world, this is what you do when you catch a murderer. You put them through this very expensive brain scan, paid for by the state, though, to find out what is wrong with this person. And in my case, they find out that I have a brain disease called Misanthropalia. Misanthropalia makes a person completely compelled to murder. You have the irresistible compulsion to go out and murder people. You can't help it. You can't stop yourself. It's a disease. It makes you do it. Now, at that point, what happens in your mind when you imagine the buck of responsibility? You look at me and it was like, oh, the buck of responsibility is squarely on Stan. He's the murderer. But then what happens? When you realize that it was this brain disease, that buck kind of jumps out of me and goes into my disease. In fact, I mean, there's no one else to blame, but we actually start blaming the disease. That's kind of weird. Here's the other trick. Let's say it wasn't a bacterial or a virus or a parasite that caused the disease. It's just my genetics. It's just who I am. It's like how I develop. It is me. That's my brain disease. And it's a part of me. At that point, you say, well, was it the disease that killed him or was it Stan that killed him? And we make this fuzzy distinction between the two because we like to imagine the buck jumping out of Stan because we realize, oh, wait, there's this identifiable thing that caused this. It is not some mysterious thing about the brain that prompted this thing to come about. Okay, so what if there's also a cure for Misanthropalia? What if I just have to eat 5 cucumbers over a 24-hour period and I am cured of Misanthropalia? So they cure me and I'm fixed. And so at that point, do they throw me in prison for 20 years in an attempt to, like, protect society or rehabilitate me somehow? I think at that point, they just make me take the cure and then monitor my recovery. Isn't that what they do? So that makes you kind of think about, well, what is the point of responsibility then? Well, it seems like the point of responsibility is to identify causal factors in order to fix things that are broken or encourage things that are awesome. I'm going to hit another analogy real quick here. Let's say it's a similar situation, but the king is killed. And so the guards are all looking around, trying to find evidence, trying to find clues. They're looking around for who is responsible for killing the king. They go into the princess's room. They find her with blood on her hands, bloody weapon, babbling about how she killed the king. She's the one obviously responsible. All the clues point to it. And in fact, she is the one who killed the king. She is the one responsible. Now, the good wizard that serves the kingdom does a magical brain scan on her and says, hold on a second, she has been enchanted by the evil wizard to kill the king. Now, at that point, you imagine that buck of responsibility. It was squarely on the princess before, right? Now, suddenly, in your mind, it jumps over to the evil wizard. You imagine the responsibility just completely jumping over. But is that the right way to think about it? We still say that she is responsible insofar as we are not restraining the jester, we are not restraining the peasant, we're restraining the princess. We did a brain scan on the princess. We are applying the magical cure to the princess. We recognize her as the responsible causal agent insofar as it tells us how to fix the problem. Okay? Now, we still imagine a measure of buck, in fact, the buck of blameworthiness, basically, passing on to the evil wizard. So we go to the evil wizard. It's like, evil wizard, why'd you do this? We do a brain scan on evil wizard. Guess what? He was also enchanted. He was brainwashed. Evil wizard was only evil because he had been put under a spell by dark sorcerer. Oh, great. Now the buck passes again. Except that we still recognize that evil wizard is evil, needs to be restrained, needs to be recognized as the agent responsible for enchanting the princess, and needs to be fixed. Okay, now we're to evil sorcerer. Now what do we do? Well, we scan evil sorcerer. And the finding there is not so simple. In fact, evil sorcerer doesn't seem to have any enchantments on him or anything. He seems to have done this stuff out of his own free will, we say. But really, good wizard scans him and is like, his brain, this is just the way his brain is. Like, he's just a mean, ornery person that likes to enchant others to kill people. That's who he is. That's his brain. It's not an identifiable disease. It's vaguely identifiable as a murderous, manipulative disposition. But yeah, he's dark sorcerer. He's a bad guy. So what do? First of all, we go about fixing him, trying to fix him, and trying to fix everything he represents. So what does he represent? He represents a danger to society. So we throw him in prison. We take away his staff. We do all these fixes to try to repair that which he represents. We also try to fix him. Maybe we put him in prison. Maybe we try to punish it out of him. Okay? That's what remedial punishment is. It's like, try to fix you by means of, like, throwing you in prison for a while. While in prison, we do some counseling on him. We find out that Dark Sorcerer has some history. Like, as a childhood, things were messed up for him. He was abused. He was tortured. Like, his psyche got severely messed up by childhood experiences. Now, at this point, again, there's this temptation to imagine that responsibility is just this singular nugget that bounces from person to person. We shouldn't think of responsibility like that. You need to recognize, number one, that, wait a minute, Dark Sorcerer is still the one who did all this stuff, and so that's why he's the one who's in jail, and that's why he's the one that we are giving counseling to, okay? However, we also recognize that there are these other causal factors, and nothing is stopping us from probing into those causal factors and going to address them, like going and arresting the person who tortured him as a kid. You know, something like that. There's a really strong propensity among us humans to try to put everything in black and white terms. Like, okay, either he has full responsibility or the buck passes and he has no responsibility. But that's a really bad way to think about responsibility. This whole thought experiment, these two thought experiments are meant to give evidence to the fact that responsibility is not some nugget that exists in objects and bounces around. Instead, it's an acknowledgement that we choose to give to causal agents in terms of things that we find valuable and interesting, in order to find out what causal agents are messed up or what causal agents are awesome and need to be encouraged further. And that's the credit-worthiness aspect of responsibility. So in other words, instead of talking about, oh, responsibility is about willful action, just talk about responsibility in terms of causal nodes. Remember how we blamed Misanthropalia instead of me for that murder earlier on? That's okay to do. Misanthropalia doesn't have a will, it's a disease. But you can refer to abstractions like that. There's nothing wrong with that. The point is that responsibility isn't magical, and it's not mystical. It is a thing that we assign in order to identify causes in service of repairing or encouraging those causes in the future. Now, this definition of responsibility is awesome, and I think everyone should adopt it. It's kind of fuzzy. It's not easy black and white stuff, but it's really good, and it is completely compatible with determinism and with rejecting libertarian free will. A lot of people like to claim that, oh, if we reject libertarian free will, or if we adopt determinism, we lose the ability to talk about moral responsibility. And that's nonsense. All of the stuff I've been talking about has to do with causes. What causes people to do certain things. It doesn't imply fatalism. It doesn't imply that morality goes away. It doesn't mean that we can't judge decisions and decision makers based on what we value. We can still do all those things. So don't let anyone tell you otherwise.